Eric, it's been a hot minute since I have seen you. I have changed some things around. I have a brand new desk. I have a brand new setup. I have brand new toys coming. So I hope you guys didn't miss us too much last week. I am here for yet another episode of the starts and sits for week 11. Week 10, I kind of had to forego as we were doing construction on the room, mostly rearranging, building the desk that I am currently sitting at that you cannot see. However, to everything that didn't happen, I want you to hear this nice message.
And to all those affected, I want to say, we are deeply sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry. Sorry. We're sorry.
All right, and we'll move right into talking about week 11 now. 3 starts, 3 sits, you know the drill. I had 3 of each drawn up for last week, and they went 3 for 3, or 3 and 3, excuse me. So that brings us up to 42 out of 60 through 10 weeks. Not bad, still over 66%. We're kind of falling away from the 75%, which is not good. So let's see if we can go 6 for 6, and I'll lay it out, and we will start with these 3 starts going right now. Start number 1, Tony Pollard, running back, Dallas Cowboys. Woo-hoo. All right, it's my favorite time of the week. It's time to talk Cowboys, which we haven't really done on specifically the start sits in much out of the 10 weeks at all, despite the Cowboys being 6-3 and one of the more solid teams in the league. But now it's my turn to talk Cowboys. And we're specifically talking Tony Pollard being the start of the week for the running back position, or at least one of my starts of the week anyway. Pollard has been underwhelming this year. That's not a surprise. But the Panthers matchup this Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern should provide a good opportunity for Mr. Pollard to return to, his RB1 roots where he was drafted in most of the leagues. And I'll give you a few reasons why. Number one, Dallas should be more focused on the run this week. Why? Because Carolina's really bad against it. They've allowed the second most touchdowns to running backs. They're allowing over 120 yards per game to running backs. It's actually 131 yards per game as I check my notes. It's not good. Number two is that their pass defense, specifically zone coverage, is actually pretty decent. And on top of it being pretty decent, Dak Prescott is also not the best against zone coverage. He's number 1 in the league in completion percentage and number 1 in the league against man coverage. However, he's 24th in the league against zone coverage, and that doesn't exactly make for a spectacular combo. Now, the good news is the Cowboys are 10.5-point favorites as of this recording, but opportunity knocks for Pollard and Dallas specifically to kind of lean on Tony Pollard. Start number 2, Courtland Sutton, wide receiver, Denver Broncos. So don't look now, but the Denver Broncos don't look like a giant pile of diaper gravy anymore. Lo and behold, they're actually a halfway decent team. They've won 3 in a row, and they've done it, well, I guess really well is the imperative adjectives that I would use. The Broncos are solid now all of a sudden. They have a rough start, but there's a good chance this game could be a little bit of a shootout. Over-under of this is 44. I'm taking a little bit on the under just because I like the Broncos' defense the last 3 weeks, and eventually Josh Dobbs isn't going to look like the second coming of Patrick Mahomes. And it might just be this week because, if you pick the opposite, then it will not happen. So, I don't know. I'm taking a shot. But as far as Courtland Sutton himself, Minnesota's pass defense is porous. And you can't say porous without saying poor. They've allowed 1,700 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns in the air. But more importantly, they've allowed the second most amount of receptions at 147 through 10 weeks. Russell Wilson has 18 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions, which is the second best touchdown to interception ratio in the league behind only CJ Stroud. Props to the young man. But as far as Russell, he's taking care of the football, and Sutton has a touchdown in 7 of the 9 games this year to accompany his 8 target, 5 reception average over those games. I like Sutton this week. I like him somewhere in the 13 to 14 fantasy point range, and if the receptions are flying and the game is actually a shootout that Russell Wilson can go with, not only would Russell probably be in for 250 yards, but Sutton could be somewhere near 20 fantasy points in that situation. Start number 3, Jahan Dotson, wide receiver, Washington Commanders. So let's be transparent. The first player I actually had in this slot is Antonio Gibson, but I believe he is doubtful as of this recording, which makes Brian Robinson an obvious start. So what happens next when you can't get who you first thought, and that's to look at other players on the team in a strong matchup, and anybody playing the Giants has a strong matchup. So I didn't want to go with the obvious and Brian Robinson. Terry McLaurin is an absolute start, and he has been phenomenal in these sort of matchups, especially against the Giants. But I think Jahan Dotson is in line for a good game, especially after last week's bagel that he put up, because he put up a fat bagel, let's be honest. I'm from New York. It was looking a little everything bagel. He was out there running all kinds of routes and couldn't get nothing. So the Giants don't have a defense. That's the first reason I really like this matchup. They're sending people out on the field who can be called defenders, but they just aren't defending much, let's be honest. The Cowboys, and specifically CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, just combined for over 300 receiving yards against this team. And that was on less than 38 minutes of time. The team had 400 total yards. It was just abysmal for the Giants. Now the Giants will face Sam Howell, who leads the league in passing yards. You put those two together, and it's plain math. You can start absolutely every one of the Commanders that you have. Start Howell, start McLaurin, start Dotson. I don't even hate starting Logan Thomas, Brian Robinson, Curtis Samuel will go to town. In terms of Dotson, he has had more than 15 fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games, which is thumbs up. I really like what he can bring to the table, and I expect him to be able to be a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. Wouldn't be surprised if he got to 15 fantasy points again. Sit number 1, Derrick Henry, running back, Tennessee Titans. So big names have been a common theme of mine. Big names in the league that I'm just not a fan of on their given weeks, and I'm doing pretty well. I didn't post week 10, but on week 10 I had Mark Andrews, and I didn't post because, I'm doing all the construction and whatnot. But, not making the video, Mark Andrews was on the list, and for week 10 he had 2 catches for like 40 yards and gave you 6 points, and it would have been a successful rate. So I'm going to stick with the big names, and I'm going to start off my sits this week with Derrick Henry. Henry faces the Jaguars, who have been extremely dependable at their rush defense. Jacksonville's allowing 3.8 yards per rush attempt. They only allowed 6 rushing touchdowns and the 5th least amount of rush yards this season. To make matters worse for Henry, in a sign that his tenure in Tennessee may actually be coming to an end when his contract ends this offseason, Tyjae Spears outsnapped Henry last week, 38 to 27, roughly, if I remember my numbers correctly. The one thing that can save Henry, however, is the red zone carries, of course, but also even a couple receptions. Jacksonville is mid-pack, allowing running back receptions. They've allowed 68 catches on 83 targets, which is far and away both the most catches and targets for any running back heavy defense that's been successful. I'm taking Henry under 11 fantasy points. If he gets above 11, it's probably due to a touchdown, and I am okay being wrong with that. Sit number 2, Adam Thielen, wide receiver, Carolina Panthers. So, being a Cowboys fan and going up against a team over which they have a 10-plus point favor going into the game, I am fully acceptant of the possibility that the Panthers could give the Cowboys a run for their money. The numbers and the offensive instability, it casts it doubt on it being likely, but it's the Cowboys. Moving along, though, And talking about actual stats and trends, Dallas is fifth in opponent completion percentage, and what that means is they have the fifth best opponent completion percentage, allowing less than 60% of opponents' passes to be completed. Dallas isn't sacking teams like they were last year, but their secondary is much, much more present. They've allowed the fourth least yards after catch, third least air yards. And as for Thielen and Carolina, they kind of feast on a combination of completions, yards after catch, things like that. Thielen has not found the end zone in 3 weeks. He's been more focused on by most defenses, and it's hurt him. The rush game has been poor enough where he's been dependent on too much, and now it's to the point where defenses are picking him out. I don't think it's going to be really that much different for the Cowboys. There's no Miles Sanders or Chuba Hubbard threat in this game. If I'm Dan Quinn, I am just completely focused on restricting this offense for the one or two weapons it may have, those being Adam Thielen and maybe Hayden Hurst or Jonathan Mingo. Anyway, Bryce Young has thrown 13% of passes that are considered uncatchable, and that's not a good combination for this defense in this game. I'm not a fan of Adam Thielen. I'm looking at less than 10 fantasy points. His ceiling is legitimately, for me, 12.5. Sit number 3, Davante Adams. Wide receiver, Las Vegas Raiders. All right, this is going to be real fun. So we started off our sits with Derrick Henry, and then we went to Adam Thielen, and now we're going to top the pinnacle with Davante Adams. I'm going to be honest, if I hit all three of these as far as sits go, I'm going to be extremely proud of the research that I've done. Adams is taking on the Miami Dolphins, of which the Dolphins are almost 2 touchdown favorites right now. So the good news is Aiden O'Connell will have to throw this football a lot, it seems. But the other part of this is that Miami has a bolstered secondary. Jalen Ramsey is back, and he will probably be matched up with Davante on man coverage, which is where Adams generally thrives. But Miami gives up some big plays, boasting 18.8% explosive play ratio from man coverage. In Adams' previous 2 encounters versus Jalen Ramsey, however, Ramsey has allowed a total of 8 receptions and 114 yards between the 2 games and has not given up a touchdown to Davante Adams. Miami plays zone coverage 72% of the time and man coverage 24% of the time, thus making Adams' chances for explosion much lower than they would normally be against a lot of other teams. Leaving Adams to try and perfect his attack against Ramsey is not something that I am willing to do with my fantasy lineup this week. It also doesn't help that in the previous 2 matchups against Ramsey, Davante Adams had Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback, and not Aiden O'Connell. So I'm going to stay away from Adams and his ever-increasing bust rate for this weekend. I'm staring at like 9 to 11 points on projections. If he was to find his way into the end zone for his first touchdown against Jalen Ramsey, I think that would be the only way to save his fantasy day. You might get to 14, 15, 16, 17 fantasy points if that was to happen. I'm not counting on it. I like Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer a little bit more out of the people who will actually catch the football as well. And anything beyond that, I don't really like anything out of this Raiders offense, just being honest. But I'm going to stay away from Davante Adams if I can at all. Those have been my 3 starts and my 3 sits for week 11. Thank you for watching. We will see you for week 12 from the new Fantasy Dojo. This has been Derek from the Fantasy Flyer. Peace out, guys.